The Liberal government is infested with Marxists. It would be much more accurate for many Liberal politicians to be in Marxist parties. It's just that they know that they wouldn't be elected to power if that were so. Thus, instead, they migrate to the Liberal leadership. Stephen Guilbeault is no exception. He's one of the prime examples. Here's what he said today in the House.
Years of this Liberal NDP government, we know that the Prime Minister is not worth the cost of groceries. Don, an independent multi-generational greenhouse operator, was forced to sell because of the cost of the carbon tax coupled with rising interest rates. After telling the Minister of Agriculture her story directly and asking him to pass Bill C-234 unamended to reduce costs for farmers, he ignored her. What does that minister have to say to Dawn and the many facing challenges like her who are losing their businesses, their livelihoods, and their family legacies because of that Liberal government's policies?
It's a good question. We look at the cost of everything right now, and we see that it's rising, and it is because of Liberal government policies, inflation, taxes, and the like.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find it quite ironic to be lectured by the Conservative Party on our support to farmers when just at the end of last year, they voted against the On-Farm Climate Action Fund to support sustainable agriculture. They voted against the Dairy Innovation and Investment Fund. They voted against support for dairy, poultry, and egg supply management producers. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we will support our farmers in the transition towards a low-carbon economy, and we will help Canadians make that transition.
So, this lunatic talks about helping farmers, which is laughable. Think about, for example, the Liberal government's Nitrogen Fertilizer Reduction Act. The only way to achieve the specifications of that act is for farmers to stop using nitrogen fertilizer because we're efficient and we're good at it already. That's not sustainable. The Liberal government's policy, isn't sustainable. What about low carbon? Tractors use diesel in order to pull massive machinery and turn over soil, break the earth. What are we going to use in its place? What should farmers use? Should they put a little windmill on the top of their tractors? Should they have battery-powered tractors? Can you imagine how quickly those batteries would deplete? Pulling massive air seeders up hills? Pulling cultivators? Pulling heavy harrows? The entire farming agenda from the Liberal government is totally insane. It's totally absurd. And if we believe for one moment that they want to ensure that food prices remain low for us and that food is readily available, we're dreaming. That isn't the objective of this Liberal government, not if we look at the fruits of their rule. Instead, based on the outcomes of their policies, the objective of the Liberal government regarding food is to make it as expensive as possible, to drive us into their control.
I'd like to remind the member from Battle River Crowfoot that he had an opportunity to ask a question, which I would encourage all members to listen carefully. I'd also encourage him and all other members to listen to the answer carefully. The honourable member from Chatham-Kent-Leamington.
Mr. Speaker, the carbon tax on food is working against Canadians by decreasing both the amount and the type of food that they buy. Visits to the food banks are at record highs, over 2 million visits. And just think the new records that we're going to set once the carbon tax is quadrupled. Highline Mushrooms is in Leamington. They supply American and Canadian retailers with their mushrooms. Their American competitors don't have to pay the carbon tax. So they're forced to pass along the carbon tax cost to the Canadian consumer. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will he axe the tax?
Great job, Dave. Great job.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, I would agree with the Conservative member for Regina Louvain, who recognized that there's absolutely no data to support any link between price on pollution and higher grocery price. In fact, Mr. Speaker, there is no pricing on pollution in the United States of America, and their grocery prices are the same as we have here in Canada. There is simply no link between pricing on pollution and higher grocery prices.
So that's utterly absurd. Suppose in a competitive market, you have two identical loaves of bread. One comes from a Canadian, one comes from an American. Everything else, all else equal. Suppose that Canadian loaf of bread has a carbon tax on it to pay for shipping, or that's attached to the shipping costs. As a consumer, a neutral consumer, which loaf of bread would one buy? The same loaf of bread from America that's X number of cents cheaper because there's no carbon tax, or the Canadian loaf of bread, which has a carbon tax attached to it in some form and therefore is more expensive? Of course, the answer is obvious and clear. Tax is a distortion. How is it possible that these, what do we call them? These individuals hardly think. They just exist. They just exist and sit in their seats to be support for whatever nonsense is being spewed from this side of the house. So how can they sit there and say, well, there's absolutely no link between higher food prices and tax? Tax increases price. That's what tax does. More than that, where is Guilbeault's data, if he wants to talk about data? Where is his data that says the carbon tax achieves his objectives, his environment objectives? You see, food is an inelastic thing, or at least the basics, the necessities of food. Bread, for example, is a good one. If the price is $1.50 or $2, we still need bread. We still need bread to eat. And so all you do as a government by increasing the tax on goods like that is make it more expensive for Canadians, thereby lowering their quality of life.
The honourable member from Flamborough-Granbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Beverly Greenhouses is an award-winning greenhouse operation in Flamborough that produces healthy, fresh cucumbers for Canadians. Almost $4,000 of their $13,000 natural gas bill in October was carbon tax, and it has only increased since then. When this NDP Liberal government quadruples the carbon tax, Beverly Greenhouses is going to struggle to compete with cucumbers imported from Mexico. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will this government finally axe the tax so that this family farm can continue to feed Canadians?
So we can appreciate that the Conservative government here, the Conservative Party, is giving real-life examples of farmers in a variety of different farming applications who have been negatively affected by the carbon tax. Has the Liberal government done the same? No. No.
The Honourable Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And being a farmer, I'm well aware how important it is to take care of the environment. And that's why it's so important to have a tax on pollution. And in fact, last Tuesday in committee, Tyler McCann of the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute indicated to committee members that there is no data to support the carbon pricing is resulting in any increase in groceries. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What's the point? What's the point of having all of these members of parliament in the House? Why are they there? Like, what's the point of having them there if they're just going to be given a script and then they read it verbatim and don't add any intellectual input at all? Why waste our money? Why not just stay at home? Why not just stay at home and have two robots read out arguments from either side, the Conservatives or the Liberals in this case, to discuss the issues of the day? Like, why are we wasting money on having the Minister for Agriculture attend the House of Commons question sessions when all he does is read statements from a page? So this Liberal government is unbelievably radical in their pursuit of Gaia. I've written about it in my new book, Kingdom of Cain. I talk about the environment and why progressives like Guilbeault, radical progressives like Guilbeault, appease the environment and pursue a policy of pure environmental, absolute environmental protection at the expense of Canadians, at the expense of the Canadian well-being, at the expense of our flourishing.